Welcome to MenTalk, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of miscarriage, infertility, infant loss, and stillbirth. Hosted by Daniel Landau, founder of menshelpline.org, we'll be sitting down every week with real guys to discuss their stories, struggles, and triumphs. So grab a drink, sit tight, and let's talk.
So welcome to the Men Talk podcast, where men talk about miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility. Today's guest is Ryan Mcauslin. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Yeah, yep, you got it.
Excellent. So Ryan, feel free to introduce yourself, where you're from, a little bit about your background, what you do professionally, and we'll go from there.
Well, my name is Ryan. I'm over in Michigan, and I'm a music director. I've been doing it for about 15 years or so now, and wife and kids, and just kind of the average life,
And where about in Michigan are you? In Detroit? Are you in suburb of Detroit? Where are you?
Over around mid-Michigan, kind of Flint, Saginaw, Bay City area. If anybody's familiar with the state, I don't know, but
so you're by Michigan State University, somewhere in that area.
Yeah, about an hour. Yeah.
Very nice. I've been to Detroit, but not that part of Michigan.
Yeah, you got to go north of Detroit. It gets real nice as you go. The further north you go.
I got to come visit. Anyway, so what's I'm glad we were connecting. We have a chance to talk a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your story. Your background. What your personal story is. I know you're a music director, so I'm really curious to hear how music helped you through the journey, through your miscarriages. What's your personal story?
Well, my wife and I got married in 2010, and it was one of those things where, sometimes you find out, your woman will find out she's pregnant and didn't really even know it. Sometimes you kind of get to a certain point, and she goes, oh, something's not feeling right. You go through a test, whatnot. But in this case, my wife ended up having a miscarriage, and she didn't know she was pregnant. So for us, it was kind of, we weren't planning on anything. We didn't know. So it was kind of like, sort of a bummer kind of deal, but not knowing to begin with, we weren't really sure entirely, I guess, how to process it really. But then we had a few months later, she had a second miscarriage. That one, she knew she was pregnant. And then right after that, there was a third one. There were 3 miscarriages within about 7 months. And it was one of those things where, just one miscarriage is very, very devastating. But then when you've got multiples, and also when you have them in a very short period of time, it can make things very, very difficult, straining both personally and then on a relationship level also. I didn't handle it very well. I will say that much. Music didn't really do much for me at all. I kind of shut everything off from the world, more or less.
So with those 3, did you do any testing? Were there any resources for you, within the hospitals, after the first one and the second one? Did you do any testing?
No, we really didn't do any testing until after the third, and actually what it was just a level issue. And, it was really nothing that there were, like prenatal, there's always like the prenatal vitamins and all that kind of other stuff. But when you start dealing with more chemical kind of stuff like progesterone, which was the issue, there are some things that can kind of help that. And I don't recall offhand what it's called, but overall, it's really just a body thing at that point. And that's all we had to do was get past that. As long as the progesterone levels would get where they needed to be, then everything was going to be fine. And which did happen with pregnancy number 4. We ended up having a wonderful, wonderful child through that, with that pregnancy. And then a year and a half later, she got pregnant again. We had another wonderful child, so we've got 2. And then a couple of years ago, just kind of randomly, out of the blue, she ended up having 2 miscarriages that we didn't think she wasn't supposed to be able to get pregnant again. But, the body has an interesting way of working.
Absolutely. What was it like? You said you broke down, didn't handle it very well. What did you do? Like, you just shut down completely? You turned off the internet? Like, what went through your
I
mind? What'd you do?
I just didn't know how to handle it, and I turned to drinking. I'm not ashamed to say it. It's not something I'm proud of, obviously, but that was my way of coping, I guess you could say, because I didn't know what else to do. And, alcohol is a suppressant, you know, and it can be, and it went from there. It was more, even having the kids, even after the kids were born, I was still drinking because I never processed any of it. And it's like the more that it tried to come to the surface, then the more I drank, because I didn't want to have to ever deal with it, so to speak. And it eventually, after about 5 years, about 5.5 years or so, it did come out. There was nothing I could do to really stop it. And it was one of those where I ended up going through, I think, pretty much all the stages of grief in the period of one night. It all kind of came flooding out. I drank a very exorbitant amount. I probably should have had alcohol poisoning. Thankfully, I did not.
Wow.
But I made calls to people that I didn't even know I did until I got texts next morning of how are you feeling and so forth. And I'm like, what? And we're looking at my phone going, oh my. But I cleaned myself up at that point. I realized, okay, this could be a problem. The drinking part, could be a problem. And so I stopped that. And then I did eventually talk to some friends and finally kind of said, okay, look, here's some stuff that had happened. And we went through some miscarriages and I just need to talk about it. At that point, it was something I had to face and whatnot. It's just the fact it took 5.5 years later, it's one of those things where it's, if you can deal with it, or I'm sorry, not deal with it. That's not the right word. If it's something you can discuss from the beginning and start to work through, it's the best way to be able to handle it and go through all those stages. It's something I wish I had done from the beginning, but you know what? It is what it is. And at this point, I'd like to be able to talk about it, maybe help somebody else and not go down the road I did.
I hear a lot that guys oftentimes turn to drinking after a miscarriage because they don't know how to handle it. There's no resources out there. There's no support out there. The focus is always on the woman. What are things that came up in conversation with your friends? Did they know what to say to you? Did they, after the miscarriage, what were their responses?
Well, nobody really had a clue. Just in general, nobody really knows how to handle that, how to respond to that. Because miscarriage is not one of those things that, thankfully, is not something that everybody, has to experience, because it's terrifying. That, there's no other way to say it. And, but then of course, when you have dealing with men, because we didn't, physically carry the baby, people really have absolutely no idea at all how to speak to the father, because okay, to say how are you feeling to a father, it's just an emotional feeling that we have, emotional or mental feeling we have. We don't have the physicality that the woman or the mother has. And so for us to even be able to describe our feelings can be extremely difficult. And at least for me, I didn't know, I just didn't want to do it at all.
What do you wish, looking back at the miscarriages you have, what do you wish you had known been there, done differently?
I wish I had known how to communicate better, or rather how to communicate at all. My wife and I, we didn't communicate. There was lack of understanding, which is, normal, because you've got two totally different experiences towards it. And, we didn't communicate. I shut her out. She shut me out. And I don't think, looking back, once we eventually finally got around to talking about it, once I finally opened up, years later, she went through the whole thing herself, essentially, at that point. I mean, because I wish I had known that walking away, emotionally, was the absolute worst thing to do. It puts a massive strain not only on yourself, but also on your partner, and then on the relationship as a whole. And this is the one thing I tell everybody now when I hear of this. I'm like, you know what? You need to keep your communication open. Don't shut your spouse out.
Yeah.
Because don't shut your spouse out. Don't turn to any substances. And because that's certainly not going to help you either. And find somebody that you can talk to, whether it's, a friend that you may not understand, but may be able to, that you can confide in, and, that kind of thing. Whether it's a family member who has maybe gone through it, or even just strangers on Facebook, like, through that, men's miscarriage support group on Facebook. That wasn't around when we went through this initially. And, I wish it had been there. I wish there would have been something there, at the time, but there wasn't. So I just had nobody to go to.
Being that you work in the church as a music director, did any of the pastors or clergy check in on you? Did they have any idea what's going on? Like, did you have that as a resource?
Well, the pastor I had, I work in a Catholic church. I'm a Roman Catholic, and the pastor I had was what they call later in life, meaning that he became a priest in his 40s or 50s after he'd already done a lot of other stuff. And he had been previously married. He had 3 kids. And so he understood the parent aspect. He'd never been through a miscarriage, thankfully, but he'd understood the parent aspect of things. And so he was very kind of understanding at that point in time with kind of what was going on. I was at home, and like I said, you misunderstand the signals and stuff from your spouse or significant other quite easily. And it was one of the things when I figured I'd stay home, and then I was told, well, I didn't want you. Well, I had misunderstood that as a just flat go away, not she really needed me at that point. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to stay home. Why stay home if I'm not wanted? I went back to work, and my boss says, why are you even here? He says, you can't function. He says, you need to go home. I'm like, what am I supposed to do at home? He goes, be with your wife. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, And, no, he was very supportive. I mean, as best he could be from a pastoral realm. And I guess, that, I mean, I never really opened up or anything. It was just the extent of, I had to say that, okay, look, she had a miscarriage, because everybody knew she was pregnant, because, you get so excited and you want to tell everybody, and, but it was, and it was the same thing with my wife, with her work. She's a massage therapist, and her boss was very, was also very kind of sympathetic towards the whole thing, and whatever you need, kind of deal. So in that regard, it was nice. I guess you could say it that way. Helpful might be a better word. Just I don't know it's one of those weird things that it's hard to describe how you had it, how people responded to it, really, because you get sympathy, you get empathy, you get those that just completely truly understand it, have been through it, and then there's those that just are so they feel awkward, and most understandable so that they just feel awkward and they don't know how to support, so they just kind of shy away, and now learning these things and stuff, it's like learning that that's okay. If somebody just kind of shies away from you when you tell them things like that, it's not because they don't care, they just don't know what to say to you.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that happens a lot where people just don't know what to say. What type of education do you think people need to hear? People need to learn about how to communicate with us. Your spouse is going through miscarriage, just know what to say to you or how to communicate. What type of education would you like to see out there?
With regard to communicating with men towards it?
Yeah, with with friends communicating towards you, whether work, spouses, do you think there should be a communication guide out there? You're suffering a miscarriage. Here's what to say, here's what not to say, here's kind of some tools and tips how to deal with it.
That kind of in a roundabout way, you pretty much would find something like that with any sort of kind of grief support booklet or anything like that. A funeral might give out just in general. And but I can't think of anything real educational, so to speak. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. Other than books that I know are already out there.
Have you read, any specific books related to dealing with the miscarriage or that you recommend?
No, I haven't. I know there are books out there, but I haven't looked them up, so I don't know any titles or specifics.
Okay. What about, general, in terms of the hospital, or I'm not sure when the miscarriages happened, you had so many of them. Were you by the side of your spouse in the hospital? Were you at home the whole time? What was that for you?
I was with her the whole time. The second miscarriage, the first miscarriage was at home. We didn't really know entirely that that's what it was. We just kind of had a thought of, wonder if maybe this was a miscarriage, maybe this, kind of thing, and went to the doctor and did some tests and found out, oh yeah, she was pregnant. Okay. The second miscarriage, we did go to the hospital, and the treatment we received from that particular hospital was so horrible. Well, not the hospital, it was the doctor and the nurse, the ER doctor and the ER nurse that were on call that saw my wife. They were just the most unprofessional, uncaring, sympathetic human beings I have ever met. And it was just kind of, they were talking to each other. The nurse and the doctor were talking to each other, not even to us. And the doctor's, looking at her and stuff like that, and looks directly at the nurse and just kind of nonchalantly, like any other conversation, just says, oh yeah, she's having a miscarriage. Not to us, nothing sympathetic. The nurse didn't say anything, and just turned around and they both walked out. And I mean, just kind of left us, you know,
You got to be
if it
kidding me.
wasn't,
That's crazy.
yeah. And if it wasn't, you know, for the type of situations, all I wanted to do was knock the guy on the floor, you know, but it's like, I didn't know what to do, you know, and, you know, they said they just up and left. Well, what ended up kind of full circle ended up happening several months later. We wrote to the hospital and said what had happened, and they sent a huge apology letter and so on and so forth. And come to find out, we were not the only ones that had happened to with just that particular doctor. It was a traveling doctor and a traveling nurse, and they were not asked to come, or they were asked to not go back.
Wow.
After that, after our letter and stuff like that. And it's just, it was you know, it was one of those, so we didn't hold it against the hospital in that case after finding out that that's what the deal was, and that the hospital dealt with it. But it was a horrible experience. The third miscarriage, she was actually getting ready to go to a doctor's appointment, and this was in a different town. And so we took off, you know, went to the appointment. Well, as we were going to the appointment, she started to, you know, kind of feel stuff, whatnot. And she basically, you know, had a miscarriage and stuff. And so went in doctor's office, they sent us over ultrasounds, all that stuff and whatnot. And we were treated very well there at that hospital and with her doctor. Her doctor treated her very, very well for all three of them. But it's just, it's one of those things with hospitals. You gotta just hope that you get the right doctor, right nurse, I guess, that knows how to deal with it or handle it, I suppose.
So interesting how sometimes hospitals don't have the best staff. They don't think, you know, doctors often think, oh, you know, they have some big egos. They often think we know what we're doing. We're the best in the field. And, you know, they don't necessarily think about the patient, so to speak. What's the patient feeling? What's the right for the patient's family? They just want to treat that patient, get them out of the ER, get them out of the way. And it's really unfortunate.
It really is. And I wish, you know, I guess going back on your education thing, I guess maybe that would probably be something I wish that there would be more out there on, would be education to deal how to handle miscarriage support in a medical setting in the hospital. Yeah. You know, kind of, I guess to go back on your education thing there a little bit, that would probably be it, would be from the professional medical level.
What about on the clinical side? I mean, is there a difference for you if you went to the clinic versus the hospital, the care that was given during the miscarriage, after the miscarriage?
I'm not entirely sure exactly how to answer that one, I guess. I mean, like I said, her doctor was great. Her doctor was phenomenal with us. And, so were the staff of the entire hospital. The hospital that we were dealing with, the one we ended up going to, was just closer to our house that we lived at the time, the one we had the issue with. But the where her doctor was in that hospital, they always treated us with the utmost care and respect, you know, just as much as anybody else.
So I guess leaving the conversation a little bit, hopefully you won't have to go through a miscarriage, you know, again, going forward.
Right.
But what sort of advice, aside from, you know, being there, try not to drink, or just what other advice would you give to our listeners out there and say, you know, you're not alone? What advice would you offer?
Tell the whole societal norm of men, keep your feelings bottled up, and, you know, you're the protectors, you fix everything. Tell society to just screw it. Let it out, scream, cry, do what you have to do with that. Let the emotions out. Don't hold them in. Even if it makes you feel like you might be the biggest crybaby on the face of the earth, or whatever feeling you might have towards crying, just let it out and do it anyway, because it will be it will relieve so much stress and so much of the pain off of your shoulders to just let that out. I mean, what I find when it finally did happen to me, and it was probably, I think, 2 or 3 hours of just flat, straight crying, and I felt so much lighter afterwards. And I felt so heavy for so many years because I just bottled it all up because, like I said, societal norms, that's what you do, man. You bottle up your feelings. Don't do it. Just let it out. Talk to, your partner, cry together. But you got to talk about those feelings. You can't hold them in because it will destroy you.
Yeah. What avenues, to let it all out, we're talking about, do you think that therapy is a good option, whether it's music, sports, animal therapy, like therapeutic side of things, going to support groups? Or did you find that sometimes support groups is solely focused on the woman and it's awkward to be in some of these groups? Did you ever try that method?
I never did try any of that. It was those groups, because groups for men just didn't exist. Even online, they didn't exist 11 years ago. There were a few out there, but they were few far between, and they might have, 2 or 3 members or on, old forums or something like that. And it's like, well, there's really no support there if you've only got a couple of people. And at least that's how I looked at it at the time. I have a different view on it now. Even just one person there has help. Even just having one person can be a big help. But, look for things, look for some support group out there, because they do now. There are more and more men support groups that are coming out, because this is now the whole idea that miscarriage only affects the woman, the mother, that's finally starting to just kind of crumble away, and people are starting to say, okay, we do need to look at the fathers. We do need to look at the men. We can't ignore them anymore.
Isn't that incredible how times are changed, and now it's not just about doing to look at the fathers, but to look at the men?
Yeah. It's I am so thankful that it is changing, and the view is starting to go that direction, to not ignore, the men, because it's extremely hurtful, when you don't have anything there, when everybody just kind of pushes you off to the side and just goes straight, to the mother, to the woman, and just kind of, pushes you off like, okay, like you don't exist because you didn't carry it. It's like, for me, I think that added a lot more stress and emotion to it being sort of cast off to the side, or at least that's the feeling I had.
I'm right there with you. When my wife and I experienced that miscarriage, I was also pushed off to the side. The main focus was, her health, her safety.
Yeah.
Let's take up of her. And no one else ever asked me, hey, how are you doing? How can I be of assistance to you? And they just wanted to take care of her. That was it. So I'm super, super glad and happy that there are things starting now, resources for men out there, support groups, hotlines, Facebook groups, retreats. Definitely want to connect people to you out in Michigan. I'm sure if that's okay with you, people can reach out to you and start building.
Oh yeah, of course. That's one of the things. Once I found that the men's support group, the one that you're a member of too, and that's how we found each other. I found that 2 years ago, I think, is when I came across it. 2 or 3 years ago. And it wasn't that I was looking for support for myself. And just, I'd gotten to a point where I said, you know what? Because a couple of friends, had miscarriages and stuff like that. And so I jumped, to be a support for them, either directly or for my friend's husband, kind of thing. And so I started to look for a group out there that, with, men that need this too, so that in this case here, I can say, hey, I've been through it. I understand. I have no clue what you're going through because everybody's different. And that drives me nuts. It's the whole thing. Well, I know what you're going through. No, you don't. You understand what I'm going through. That's a completely different definition of I know how you feel or I understand how you feel. And nobody knows how you feel, but they can understand it if they've been through it.
Definitely. And I'm really, really glad that you're on that group and so many others. We definitely need to keep helping everyone who's gone through it because, like you said, don't let these things boil up inside of you. Cry about it, talk about it. It's very, very healthy. So men listening, fathers listening, future fathers, don't get discouraged if a miscarriage happens to you. There are resources out there. Very powerful. We can connect to one another. We can help one another. You are not alone.
Right. And it's nothing you did. This is not something you could have prevented. And it's not something you can fix. That was another thing that was very hard to understand and accept, was that it was nothing that we did or nothing I did. And it was nothing that I could fix.
100%. It's nothing that you, I, or any other guy can fix. It's part of life. It happens. There are ups and downs, and the statistics don't lie. One in four pregnancies end in a miscarriage. I mean, that's 25%. So the person to your left could have experienced it, and the person to your right could have experienced.
Right.
So you're not alone.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really enjoyed our time speaking to one another. And once again, you've listened to Men Talk, talking about miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility. And please don't hesitate to reach out and don't be a stranger. Thank you so much again, Ryan.
No, thank you.
All right. Be well.
You too.
You've just listened to another great episode of Men Talk with Daniel Landau. If you've suffered from miscarriage, infertility, stillbirth, or infant loss and want to open up about it, reach out. We'd love to have you on the show. You can also join our Facebook group, or if you'd like to get involved and start a chapter in your neighborhood, visit our website, www.menshelpline.org today. Until next week, stay strong, and remember, you're not alone.